Where does it fall on the horrific stress versus enjoyable ratio?
There's a bit of a reality check. These drivers make it look easy. It's not.
I was in a flood of tears behind the scenes.
Oh, no.
You have to put a brave face when you go and do the podium, be all smiley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the new Silver Arrows radio show. What a roller coaster fortnight for Mercedes, with the soaring highs of a spectacular Monaco victory, followed by a strong podium for George on Sunday in Barcelona. But there are still some frustrations overall. With the championship margins razor thin, we have a massive amount to unpack. Joining me, Steph Wentworth, to break down the engineering and the tough lessons learned, are technical director James Allison, alongside third driver Fred Vesti and development driver Anthony Davidson. Later, head of virtual world simulation Riccardo Musconi takes us inside the simulator and helps us celebrate George's 100th Grand Prix with the team. Gentlemen, like I said, we've got so much to cover, so let's get straight into it. James, let's start with you. Just give me your immediate thoughts on George, Kimi, the team's overall weekend in Barcelona.
Well, I guess the overall thought is of a disappointing weekend. Okay, we got a strong podium, as you rightly point out, but after winning all of the opening races, to have a DNF with one car and a P2, it's definitely not the weekend we were hoping for. But the opening stint with George was very strong, but then it sort of fell away in the subsequent two, allowing Lewis to go off on his lone three-stop adventure, and where we didn't have the pace to match that. If the virtual safety car had not come out when it came out, then it probably still would have been a very tall ask for Lewis to have got the win. But nevertheless, we would have wanted to be in a position where we weren't relying on the vicissitudes of a safety car or no safety car. So it was overall just we weren't as quick as we needed to be.
And of course, as you mentioned there, Lewis with the victory. What does kind of the resurgence of McLaren and Ferrari mean for a multi-team championship battle?
Well, I think we probably need to separate those two. I'm not certain that McLaren have resurged. Ferrari, on the other hand, did bring quite a significant upgrade to this race. And I think what you're seeing mostly there is these are very young rules. And our car was launched with a bit of a head start on the other teams, a head start that we've been able to maintain for a number of races. But the fact that the rules are so young mean it is relatively easy at the moment, because the rules are not yet as explored as they might be, to find performance. And an upgrade package, a significant upgrade package, is worth about as much as the gap we had between our car and the others at the beginning of the season. So if Ferrari bring an upgrade package to a race unanswered by one of our own, then it will close the gap that previously felt comfortable. And I think that's mostly what we're seeing. Of course, we're not without guns in this fight, and in due course, our car will receive its own upgrades. And as long as we can keep the overall development slope in the factory steep, and then deploy it when we think it's sufficient to do so and suits us to do so, then we should be able to re-establish the gain that we had at the beginning of the year, if our development slope in the factory is matching everyone else's.
Of course, and to the left of you, we actually have Fred, third driver, who spends a lot of the time in the simulator. You were in for FP1. How does it match the simulator, being in the car on track, and what kind of did you take from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working on W17 for such a long time now, and to finally be behind the wheel myself was such a awesome thing, something I've been looking forward to for such a long time. Some things was very surprising. I've done a lot of development of this car in the simulator, and we've captured a lot of things. So I was able to drive the car relatively relatively quickly, not quite optimized as I only had 1 hour. But we did also discover a few things that we can improve in the simulator, and that was the real purpose of this FP1. It was to bring all this knowledge back to the simulator and sort of optimize the way we prepare races, the way we prepare the drivers, and that was really good. I had a really good stint in the long run in FP1, which I was able to sort of get into a good rhythm with the car, and I was really surprised, particularly by the high speed of these new cars. I've only driven the ground effect cars previously, so this car actually felt quite different in the high speed, very smooth, very confident feeling.
Fred, it's, you only get that 1 hour, and you've sort of longed to be in the car. It's a massive burden of responsibility, but also a really sort of exciting opportunity. Where does it fall on the horrific stress versus enjoyable ratio? Which dominates?
Basically, I've been to every race this year. I've listened to every debrief, watched every session, and you sort of stood there. Why did you do that? I could have done this, you know. But then you get into the real car, and you're like, hang on, this is pretty damn difficult, and this takes a bit of getting used to. These cars are insanely quick. They are right on the edge of, you know, right or wrong. You need to slide them in the perfect way. Otherwise, you are either spinning or you're driving slowly. So it's very, very difficult to get right. I was definitely on the nervous side, but, you know, I've done these FP1 sessions before, and I've sort of got into the rhythm with it. You just got to accept that you're not going to be perfect in this 1 hour. It's going to feel rough. It's going to feel like you're making mistakes that you shouldn't be doing. But, you know, that's part of the learning. You're getting thrown into a car that you have never driven before. And it is a Formula One car, by the way.
Sorry, Steph, I'm going to take over your job a little bit.
Go on.
Fred's comments really remind me of my time as a third driver when we were doing the Friday driving every Grand Prix. We were lucky as young drivers back then to be able to do that. So I understand and empathise that what you mean by the pressures that you have, but also you want to showcase what you can do as well at the same time, and also learn so that you can report back and do your job like the rest of us in the simulator as well. So it's a privileged position to be in. But my question was, so you've got limited experience on the ground effect car, limited time behind the wheel, but also with W17 and the new generation, which one is easier to jump into and be closer to the limit?
I actually think this one was surprisingly good, particularly in the high speed. And that was what instantly surprised me.
Because of
in the
what?
ground effect cars, we always had this sort of bottoming and bouncing feeling. Not the bad one we saw initially, but even the last few. You know, I was probably the last one to drive the ground effect car in Abu Dhabi Young Driver Test, and even then you could sort of feel it, and it just took away 10% of confidence. I think if you ask George or Kimi, they would probably say the same thing. Where this car, it just sits so nicely in the high speed. It invites you to push, and it allows you to push. It doesn't mean I took it all, because it is still a car that needs to run a couple of hours later. So, you know, you got to balance the risk as well. The most difficult thing was two things. First time driving a car where the front wing goes down and then recovers when you brake. So I had a big lockup. That's something we haven't really seen in the sim. So that's something we're going to work on.
But something we've seen with all cars from the start of these regulations is not an uncommon.
So exit of turn 3, the FIA have decided to open SM sort of while you're still cornering and not straight line, which is surprising. So the first time I pressed it, I actually went a bit off track because I lost so much front load. And, you know, these are the kind of things I had to discover in reality. And in the sim, yes, you can feel it, but it's such a perfect environment. You don't really expose yourself to those smaller issues, where in reality, you know, you got so many things to deal with and you just get thrown into it. But, you know, it's the coolest thing ever. And I can't wait to be back in the car.
Yeah, you talk about the car and driving it and FP1 so romantically, but it's not all a love story because there were some reliability issues. James, let's just touch on that. Kimi takes P2 on track and then suffers this race-ending electrical shutdown. Is it an isolated failure, or are we looking at systemic vulnerability?
Well, I think anyone who's a keen watcher of the sport will have seen that this has laid a few Mercedes engine cars low over the season so far. They're not all identical, but they do sort of originate in the same broad part of the battery, and I think that most of the areas of risk have been understood, and with a bit of luck, when we start to sort of phase in the new modules, into the racing season, we call the battery the module, then our fortunes as a fleet should pick up, and obviously for us that's an important thing. These DNFs are very, very painful.
And how do you and the team kind of manage the ongoing challenge of pushing really hard for performance while also kind of maintaining that necessary robustness so as to prevent more reliability issues as the season progresses?
Well, you accept that there will be failure. We try to make sure that failure happens in testing or on rigs, and that it happens as little as possible when you're out there trying to earn championship points. Now, clearly doesn't always work, because occasionally the car will DNF, and that is definitely a failure of our process and all of our attempts to deliver performance without the downside of that performance. But when a failure like that does happen, then in the first instance, and perhaps before it's fully understood, then the team will tend to take a slight half step backwards to be more cautious with the equipment, to push it slightly less hard, just to give a little bit of resilience to the kit that's obviously suffering. But a different part of the team will try to figure out what was the root cause of that failure, to design that out, prove that out, and put something back on the table that is sufficiently robust. So you do a first intervention that is just to try to sort of give the vulnerable thing an easier life, while then working on a proper cure that lets you really cane it.
Interesting. Well, Anne, let's put it to you, because you've just been at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. We both have. And that is an event that is a masterclass, really, in managing kind of setbacks and failures.
Yeah, well, coming back from Le Mans, you realise in that race that it's 16 Grand Prix in one event. So obviously your chance of survival is pretty slim, really, through getting through unscathed without any kind of reliability issues. So you watch it play out and over lots of different, full course yellows and slow zones that they have there. And you've just got to it's a lesson for everybody involved with that particular part of the sport, that you've got to be on top of everything at all times. But, mistakes will happen. As James was saying, you have to, unfortunately, factor that in as part of your championship campaign and be realistic that it might or probably be a reality at some stage. But it's not just good enough to have a fast car. You have to have reliability on your side, and you've got to do everything you can to mitigate that. But, and for a driver as well, to keep your head in those moments, the championship is long. We all know that. And resilience from their side as an athlete is absolutely paramount in these moments. And I'm looking forward to seeing how robust Kimi and George are mentally through the season, as inevitably these problems will come their way more and more.
Now, just kind of before we wrap up the Barcelona talk, one thing, and I think Fred's coming for your job. He was in the booth in FP2 commentating.
Yeah, I mean, I got invited to the Sky commenting box during FP2, and it was fun because I'd just driven the car a couple of hours earlier, and I was basically able to give almost real-time insight to why the cars was handling like it was. Lots of overheating, obviously, and I think I was able to give a bit of feedback to the commentators that, these tires are under severe stress in Barcelona already from turn 4. You're starting to manage, and if you don't, you will lose a lot of lap time sliding. So yeah, it was quite fun. I won't steal your job. I will still be driving, hopefully many years.
I remember again doing that. That was the first time I got behind the microphone, was when I was doing Friday driving, and basically the broadcast team are always keen to get the real story behind the wheel, and obviously the race drivers aren't. They haven't got the time to do that, but that's where a test driver and someone that's done those Friday running sessions can come in and really deliver their feelings, and you have to be eloquent like Fred is, and remember those feelings in the car and convey that for the fans sitting at home, because they hang off your every word, and so does the broadcast team. So yeah, but it's not for you yet. He's got a long career ahead of him turning the steering wheel, but you never know. One day, that's the one thing you learn in this sport, that you can never predict where you're going to end up and what role you might have involved in the sport one day.
We'll check back with you in 20 years, Fred.
Yeah, 20 years.
Okay, well, let's look back a couple of weeks because we actually have to talk about Monaco as well. We haven't yet discussed it. If we look back, James, it was a fantastic result for Kimi. What was it that kind of unlocked that mechanical compliance that allowed for Kimi to navigate the streets of Monaco, the famously tight, twisty circuit, so easily and secure that victory?
I think you have to give a lot of credit mostly to the way Kimi drove it. But we did bring a bit of extra weaponry for the car to this year's Monaco, weaponry we'd been missing for the last several seasons there. Monaco presents lots of challenges. It's very slow, very twisty, but it's also surprisingly up and downy, and there's a lot of change of gradient in the corners themselves. And that can leave a car very easily trying to sort of hobble its way around the corner on three wheels, lifting either an inside front or sometimes even an inside rear tyre. And what you would ideally like is a suspension system that is supple enough that the inside wheel will droop down and touch the ground, keep all four of the tyres in contact with the ground, even when it's being provoked by some fairly aggressive terrain in the case of Monaco. And we have come to Monaco for several years just bringing the sort of classical springs and bars that go fine at flat racing tracks, but are not great on the street circuit of Monaco. So this time round, we bought a range of anti-roll bar options and spring options that allow the wheels to operate a bit more independently of one another and to keep their place on the road even when subjected to some of the trickier spots around the lap in Monaco. And that was definitely a good thing for us. It took us maybe a little longer than we would wish to dial it in Friday to Saturday, but by the time we got to Saturday morning, we'd got it nicely in the groove, and then the drivers were able to do their thing with it, and the car flew.
Kimi he's basically fresh out of karting, and this tight, twisty racetrack.
It's exactly like that.
And I just thought, on paper, it should be a circuit that suits Kimi really well. And there's only so far you can take a car to give to a driver. But when the competition is as close as it is, the driver delivers, especially on a track like that in Monaco. They deliver that extra 1 or 2%, maybe even 5%. And that's what I saw Kimi able to do there. He produced that bit of magic to get the car right at the front, and he capitalised on the car that he had. And for George, he will have tracks where he's stronger inevitably this season, and then put the pressure back on Kimi. You do start to look at what your teammate's doing. You take a few setup ideas, not just in terms of mechanical configuration, but also the tools that they have, the array of tools, the differential, the brake bias migration, all things like that. And I feel like, there's definitely going to be some kind of cross-pollination between the two drivers to try to get the upper hand. Absolutely.
It's a long season ahead as well. James, how do you categorize the season so far? What are your overall season thoughts?
Well, it's a promising start to a thing that feels like it's barely begun. It's going to finish in December, and we're a long way away from that. We're not. I thought we're a third of the way through or something like that. So it's a promising start, but nothing that you could ever feel like the job is done. As I mentioned earlier, the rules are so young that it's extremely easy to make the cars quicker at the moment. Any team that ignores that will just go backwards very, very fast. And so our job is to make sure that we keep making the car quicker with the engineering improvements, that the drivers keep wringing its neck and getting the very most from it, and that we just eliminate any of the reliability woes that have taken quite a few points from our ledger so far this season, so that we can then hopefully show up at each race in the remainder of the season and put on a good show.
Absolutely. Now, my final question to you. There's been a lot of chatter, a lot of noise on social media regarding favoritism and this kind of idea that Mercedes may be developing a car in one direction as opposed to another. Please, as the technical director, can you explain how development of the car works and why there are sometimes these unlucky events for one driver, and shut it down once and for all?
Well, I doubt very much whether it will shut anything down once and for all. But because people are very invested in the people that they support, and they want their driver to prosper above all others. All I can say is, if you ever wanted that feeling of favoritism to understand where it sits on our psyche, you'd need to come and work in a team. Because if you were lucky enough to come and work in a team, you would instantly be imbued with the culture of that team, and you would understand how utterly alien that thought is to anyone in a team. And when we hear it, it's like we're hearing another language. It's an argument you can never win, because both sides of it are just completely divorced from one another, because it is in all of our interests that both our drivers prosper. And actually we're ambivalent about which one is better than the other. We want a 1-2 in every race, and we don't care the order. The only point where we would start to have an opinion is if one driver is mathematically incapable now of winning a championship, and the other driver is in a fight with a third-party driver. At that point, the team has a sort of right to an opinion. But up until that point, we just want both our players to be right up there every single race. And because that's, our main championship, weirdly, is not the drivers' championship, it's the constructors' championship. If we're lucky enough to win a bonus, we win it on the basis of the constructors' position, not the drivers. We don't get anything for that. So everything we care about is constructors oriented, and favoritism makes zero sense to us in that respect. We just want maximum points from both the drivers at all times.
It'd be like telling the engineering team that, well, you can only compete with one car for the rest of the championship. It'd be such a devastating blow for the team. If you could only focus on one car and not have the other one involved at all for the rest of the year, you might as well not turn up. They'd be so gutted. But the point is to have two fast cars. What have we got here now in the factory? Well over 1,000 people working for these two cars to be as fast as they possibly can.
Yeah.
I think also from a driver's perspective, it shows how on a knife edge these drivers, have to be in order to fight right at the front of Formula One. It's, we're so early in the regulations, but we're already seeing half a second in the top 10 in Barcelona, which is super close. You need to be on the top of your game from FP1 onwards and for the whole weekend in order to fight for the championship. And that's Formula One. That's why these are the greatest racing drivers in the world. And that's what we love about this sport as well.
And it's another reason why the likes of Fred and myself and the other simulator drivers that we have here in the team do what we do, because we're doing it for two other people. We're selfless in that regard, and although we like our time driving the car, but the whole process is for the two cars on track.
Yeah, that's something I've experienced this year. I've always since 21 been doing the sim with the team, but this year being so much closer to the everyday stuff in the simulator, going to every race, listening to every debrief. I feel such a big part of it now, and actually the reward of seeing a Mercedes car win, I've never really felt that feeling as big as I feel now. I'm a racing driver. I like when I win myself, but this year I'm really feeling that special feeling. And I don't care if it's George or Kimi. I see the Mercedes car crossing the line, and the car that we've all worked so hard to build. And I think that's very special.
Well, I think that was a very definitive answer to close out this segment. James, thank you so much for joining us, but we know you are very, very busy. You've provided all of the technical insight and given us a lovely deep dive, which we very much appreciate. And Ant, to you as well, thank you both for joining us. We know the both of you have bits and bobs to get off to, debriefs to have, simulations to go to, so we'll let you go, and thank you again. All right, we are shifting gears now to look at the hidden performance machine behind the race team. Joining myself and Fred, we have Riccardo Musconi, Head of Virtual World Simulation. That's quite a title, isn't it? Ricky, tell us about your current role at Mercedes and how you got into this very highly specialized sort of role.
Well, it's a very fancy job description, but it's encompassing a bit like managing of the groups that looking at simulation of the car, whether it's the driver in the loop simulator, where Fred is very busy with, or simulation of lap time, or fluids, so temperature of the fluids and thermal aspect of the car. And yeah, it's more about my role about capability, so looking after how to improve the processes and having the resources in the right place at the right time. How did I get here? Not from the virtual world. I came through the real world from the track. I arrived in Brackley back in 2006 when the team was still called Honda Racing. Went through the Brown period and then into the Mercedes era. And at the time I was a data engineer, so traveling to all the races events, been working with all the drivers have been through here, Barrichello, Michael Schumacher, which was my idol growing up, Nico Rosberg, Lewis, Valtteri, and then finally George, before I sort of came back to the factory. Halfway through that, from performance engineer, I did the race engineer role and had the pleasure to work with George in his first year of Mercedes. He arrived here with a label of Mr. Saturday because he was very capable in qualifying in these Williams days. But actually, I was very surprised how good he was out of the box on Sundays. That year, he had very strong races all the time. Sometimes qualifying, the car was a bit tricky on Saturday, but he always made progress no matter what on Sunday. Even I remember in Miami where we dropped at the back of the grid basically at the start, at the poor start, but we finished fifth. Epic drive. And then, yes, his first race winning happened in Brazil. Very emotional.
And you were actually his race engineer for this.
I was his race engineer, yeah, for that race. I still remember like it was yesterday, especially choosing the tyre on the grid. The team made a call. George was trying a bit to go in another direction. Eventually, we listened to him. He went on the grid of those tyres, and then he wasn't happy anymore. And I was like, "Look, let's do the sensible thing. Let's do what the number said." So eventually, we made the right decision. I'm quite glad we did that. But yeah, it was a brilliant day. I remember I was in a flood of tears behind the scenes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, to put a brave face when you go and do the podium, be all smiley, but it was very emotional.
It was just champagne in your eye.
It was champagne in my eye, but also the fact that, it was I knew it was my penultimate race as a race engineer, and that has always been my dream job growing up, probably even overachieve of what my dreams were.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's great that you can have those memories. We're seeing some images of you with trophies. You've had lots of silverware in your time.
Yes, yeah, quite a few successful years. The Brown year was the first championship here in Brackley. As an organization, the people were not probably believing in themselves, and they made us all realize that actually we were champions, and then Mercedes invested in the team. We had to go through this difficult period at the beginning, because going from the year of Brown, where there was no investment because the resources were very limited, it took a few years to rebuild the team. But when we hit the ground in 2014, it was brilliant. Actually, back in 2014, I was factory based for a couple of years, and I was following things from the remote garage. But I saw basically the first time the hybrid engine came to the dyno here in Brackley, and it was a terrific experience since the car being put together, and then going to back to the track and use it and run it.
This past weekend, George just celebrated 100 starts. It seems like time has absolutely flown by. What is he like as a driver? What has he learned? How has he grown? And how have you seen that over your time with him?
I think he's always been a very mature person since the word go. I really enjoy working with him. Fantastic person to work with. He's very pragmatic. He's very good at leaving the emotions to the side, and very talented. So the speed has always been there. That was the first of quite a few race wins for him, and definitely a person that can win a championship in the future, hopefully. And we want to give him the car to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And Fred, you work alongside him as well. He had a tough couple of weekends, but has really kind of bounced back in terms of pace, and Mr. Saturday's back with a pole position. How is your relationship with him? How do you work together and see him as a driver?
Well, I have a very special relationship with George. When I joined the Mercedes team back in 21, he was sort of just showing up in the real car, and he obviously got the contract for 22. But he was very helpful with me. He was watching my Formula 2 races. He was asking the tough questions, helping me get better. And we've sort of done the same program, the same road towards Formula 1, and been supported by Toto and Gwen and the whole team here in Brackley. So, I have a lot of special moments with George, but to see him last weekend bounce back like that in Barcelona was really good. Obviously, Monaco was very difficult for him. The start of the season hasn't been easy on him, but to bounce back like that with a lot of confidence was good to see.
On that topic of being on track, let's talk about you, because you've had a massive weekend in Barcelona. FP1, right in the car. How do you take the data from the track? How do you take the data from the simulator and kind of use them for both?
Yeah, I mean, this is what really interests me. It's such an amazing thing that we can replicate everything. But in reality, it takes a lot of work. I think we spent around half the time actually correlating and making sure what we are doing is correct, because we could be spending 10 days on a specific thing. But if it's wrong and the data is wrong that we are looking at, it's completely useless. So it's this very, very sensitive thing. And it's the engineers, it's the drivers, it's the data that we put in. Everything needs to be perfect. And that teamwork and that feeling around that is really special, I think. And, when I get to drive the real car, I can sort of pinpoint things that is not realistic in the sim. And we already have a list of 4 or 5 things from that one FP1 that we can definitely improve in the simulator here in Brackley.
Yeah, it's like a true or false game. Like which one's right?
It is. It's a very, very complicated, and sometimes you just need to have the experience in the real thing before you can actually tell the difference.
Ricky, from your perspective as well, how is it when you have a driver that has that experience in both the sim and on track? Can you pull more data when you've got that?
Well, yes. Our role now that Fred has driven the car and gave us feedback is making sure that none of this feedback goes to waste. We need really to go through every single comment he made with a fine-tooth comb and basically look at every detail he mentioned that is not correlating to the reality. So the driver in a loop simulator is a collection of different models. You have a model of the surface of the track. You're going to have a model of the tire, a model of the suspension, a model of the aerodynamics. And when there is something that doesn't agree with reality, you need to get to the bottom of where the miscorrelation is. Where is it sitting? So that's what we're going to do, starting from probably the biggest thing that Fred experienced. It was how easy it was to lock up tires in real life compared to simulator. So going into the details of that and understanding where exactly is the difference. And that is that special thing that is difficult to see just in the number alone, is the human perception that it's the important thing or the added value of Fred being in the real car.
That's what interests me a lot, is like the drivers talk feelings, we experience it in the real car, and the engineers talk numbers. And it's sort of our job to meet in the middle and figure out how we communicate well between those two things. And that's basically what we do. We take the feelings, the numbers, and combine it into one thing.
Yeah, I like that job description. Okay, Ricky, what about the hardware of the actual simulator? Can you tell us a little bit about the setup, or is it totally top secret? Can we not know?
So the way the simulator works, Double in the Loop, is basically a platform with a cockpit of the car. We try to make even that sort of geometry as realistic as possible, so they have the real seat of the car, pedals that are also close to reality as much as possible, and the actual steering wheel they get in everyday's car. Then a big screen that goes 360 degrees around the platform, and the platform is free to move in 6 degrees of freedom, and provides them all the motion that they experience on the car. There is a limitation in the fact that we cannot give them exactly the same acceleration or the same velocities they experience in real life, because that would make the platform itself moving around too much for what is possible within the limits of a building. But as I said, we try to give them the right information at the right time, and that is the key. So even the latency of the motion of the platform is also very important to make them feel what the car is doing at the right time. If I give him an information of what the car is doing with 50 millisecond delay, he will not be able to catch an oversteer moment. It would just go in a spin. And then we look at the data as it's unfolding as the real car. So actually the software we use to look at the data from the simulator is no different to the real car, to the point that an engineer can turn up with his laptop and pretend to be at the track. So the level of realism is pretty high. Even the visuals are quite amazing, to the point that sometimes we need to strip them down a bit because the driver find them is a bit too busy almost to watch. So we get rid of advertisement or other banners if we can.
Fred, how do you find it? Is it accurate to real life, especially just coming out of the car in Barcelona?
I mean, it is incredible how close the sim gets to reality. Obviously, there is always the last little bit that is reality, the G-forces, feeling how everything is working on the surface, the tires, how they're sliding and so on. But it is incredible how close we can get. The team, they can make, the smallest changes, like half a PSI of tire pressure, which is nothing. And we can feel that difference in the simulator. And one big challenge is the latency, because if there is any delay, it's completely off. We cannot tell anything. And that's always something we're pushing the engineers to work on. And that's also why some people, when they don't know our simulator, they expect it to be moving like left, right, going everywhere. But the further you have to move, there will be a bigger delay. Yep. So actually, we're not moving very much. We're almost... it's like very quick, small movements, and that's the best way to feel the car. And I find that quite fascinating. Again, I don't understand any of the models. I don't understand anything of the math behind. I just feel this car like it was reality, and that's sort of what I do.
I'm fascinated. No, I love this. Ricky, when it comes to testing, for example, like a new upgrade, if you want a new front wing or new suspension design, how does that translate in the virtual world when you're testing out the new upgrades before putting them on the car?
There's a lot of work on the driver in the loop simulator that goes around the race event, so preparation, support during the event itself, and then post-event if we want to review things that have gone wrong and we want to make some learning. And then the big one is development. So the part of development is basically looking at what's coming a few months down the road, because just to produce an aerodynamic package, for example, it takes a couple of months. So you have the data ahead of that. And we want, first of all, to assess what the handling implication on the car are. So looking what the effect on car balance is and trying to be predictive and knowing the requirement for setup adjust that they go with the new package, for example. And the other thing is the lap time, because obviously in this business we're measured by the stopwatch. So it's always useful to know how much lap time we're going to be bringing during the season, predicting where the other teams, what the rate of development is going to be like, and what do we need to stay ahead, because it's not just about winning a race, is about winning a championship that is on 20 plus races these days. It's quite a long season. So you try to program even when to introduce the packages and try and always to have the competitive edge.
And just kind of on that, Fred, what does your day-to-day role look like in terms of working on development versus working on each race as it comes?
Yeah, so that's really the decision of the engineers and sort of the leadership. As Ricky touched on, it's quite a bit of a strategy to when you want to produce those upgrades. You want to be just fast enough to win the race, but you also don't want to put everything on too early and then miss out later. Already, we have some engineers already working on 27 and trying to optimize the car ahead of next year. But we're in a championship right now as well that we need to win. So it's quite an interesting situation. But from my perspective, I basically show up at 9 a.m. The sim is all ready to go, and there is a long run plan laid out for the day. We usually finish around 6 p.m. And that's around 150 laps, 180 laps on a big day. And sometimes it's multiple tracks, sometimes it's just one track. It really depends on what we're trying to discover. But we do pre-event work. So before every race weekend, we do at least a few days of running. Mm-hmm. That's also for George and Kimi to be ready, but also for the engineers to set up the car and get everything ready. Then we do post-event. So we try and analyze like how well did we correlate? What could we have done different for better performance? What should we do ahead of the next race? And it sort of goes between those. And then on development days, it could be a new aero package that we are testing. It could also be tires. Tires are massive. It's the only thing that basically touches the ground, you know. So everything goes through the tires, and we need to make sure that those are modeled correctly, which is a very, very big challenge. And I think no one has ever nailed 100%. So it's like a constant work. So yeah, there is a lot that goes into it. And for me, it's nice when there's variation. In December, January, it's quite hard because it's just very repetitive. We're trying to make this car quicker. And when we're more in season, it's a bit more different because it's new tracks. We're testing so many different things. So it shifts over the year what we focus on.
Is there competition in between the simulator drivers? Who has the fastest lap? Who's the quickest? Is there competition? No.
Well, no, because it's that if that's your mindset, you're probably out of a job very quickly. Because
I think that's maybe why I don't have this job.
In the simulator, basically, it's about being consistent. The Mercedes rule of thumb is like you need to stay within 1/10 your average lap time. Then it's useful data. If you're further than 1/10, it starts to become quite tricky for the engineers to pick out the differences. And we're not talking half a second or 1 second lap time gains. We are, in the thousands of a second sometimes. And they need to trust the drivers that we are not just trying to let our ego win. There is sometimes where you need to push the car to or over the limit. And that's probably where my real life experience comes in handy. How we take the curbs, how we slide the tires. These things are quite tricky to get right. So having driven the car sort of helps judge that. But yeah, it's a very interesting question. There's no competition.
There is a secret championship I is not aware.
Oh yeah.
See, this is what I wanted to know.
I've heard about the track limit championship, which is always a big discussion because we are racing drivers. I'm telling the engineers sometimes. I've been since I was 8 years old. I've been told to maximize what you give me, and I will maximize the track. So, we are desperate to go fast. Sometimes they say dial it back a little, just be consistent.
Is correct in the sense that if they go for ultimate lap time, we're getting those laps that are fast and slow, lots of mistakes. Then there's the magic lap that you think, oh wow, this is the best change ever, but it just came as a fluke. So yes, we need somebody that is quick, is probably going to 95% consistently and showing us where the envelope of the performance is rather than going for the ultimate lap.
This is fabulous. I've loved this deep dive into the world of the simulation. I think we'll definitely come back to this. But that about wraps up this episode of the new Silver Arrows radio show. A huge thanks to James Allison, to Ant Davidson, Riccardo Musconi and Fred Vesti for joining me. And a huge thank you to you for listening. We'll catch you all in the next episode. Bye-bye now.